All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today to Manny Super Civic Cyber Conversations. I am joined by Kurtis Wu. Kurtis, say hi to our viewers.
Hey, everyone.
Today we're here to discuss about San Francisco's public bank. But before we do that, in the Q&A section, you're going to find a link. And that link is going to be for Manny's donations. Right now, Manny's a physical space. We are currently not opened, as most businesses in San Francisco. However, we want to keep our mission of civically engaging San Franciscans and people all over the country. So if you want to support us and you want to help us keep on doing our mission, please click on that link and donate to Manny's if you can. And thank you. So Kurtis, let's talk banks.
Yeah.
As I was telling you in our pre-call, when I was doing your event, when I was drafting your event for this, I had to ask myself, I don't know about public banks. What makes a public bank different than a regular bank, a private bank, a bank like Chase or Bank of America? And it definitely was insightful. It definitely provided, it definitely enlightened me as to what a public bank is and what it means for constituents. So for those of you that don't know, the mission of San Francisco's public bank is to establish a municipal-owned bank in San Francisco, rooted in principles of racial, social, economic, environmental justice. And as I was doing my research on the coalition that you and Jackie Fielder founded, Jackie Fielder had a talk with us this past Friday. Check out her conversation on YouTube. But to get into that, you, a co-founder, can you explain to us a little bit about San Francisco's Public Bank Coalition and the history behind it?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having us. Really excited about to talk to you guys. Our coalition was founded, really started, the impetus was the effort at Standing Rock against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And when Trump had signed the executive order to push the pipeline through, the resistance then changed to target the financial institutions funding that pipeline. Seattle, New York, cities across the country were all doing it. And that's how actually I got involved and connected with Jackie Fielder, the other co-founder, Public Bank Coalition. She really led the effort, the divestment effort from Defund DAPL. Through that effort, we realized to truly divest, it's one thing to move the city's money out of a Wall Street bank. It's another thing of where you're going to put it. And what we found out is all these Wall Street banks fund Dakota Access Pipeline, fund fossil fuels, fund detention centers and prisons. So the conversation really shifted because it didn't make sense for us to just move the city's money from one bad bank to another bad bank. Credit unions and mission-driven banks are great, but they don't really have the capacity to manage a city. So, for example, San Francisco has $13 billion of taxpayer money and budget to manage. So it just becomes it's a capacity issues for the local banks. So really the conversation shifted to a public bank. So our coalition started reaching out. We knew then that it was going to be bigger than Dakota Access Pipeline because it was also about what a public bank can do for affordable housing and how it can divest from weapons and fossil fuels and private prisons, and how it can invest in renewable energy and support our local credit union. So it became a much more broader scope of what this bank could do. So Jackie and I just literally started reaching out to different organizations and groups, getting kind of like a temperature check on the idea of SF creating a public bank. The interest was overwhelming. Our coalition has over a dozen member organizations, such as like Democratic Socialists of America, SF chapters in it, PODER, the California Nurses Association, California Faculty Association, among others. So a lot of groups from racial, social, economic, and environmental justice. So that's kind of really how the coalition started. It originally started with divestment and DAPL, but it's definitely merged into a lot more bigger kind of project.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. That's definitely you explaining that there was a background of social justice behind the formation of San Francisco's public bank is very telling of the values and the morals of San Franciscans. And it also begs the question, is San Francisco the only city in the country to have a public bank? And how easy is it to fund or to start a public bank?
Yeah. Well, currently SF doesn't have a public bank right now. That's what we're working on. So we're the coalition that's working to try to get that established. Right now, there's only one public bank in the entire country, the Public Bank of North Dakota. It's been around for 100 years, since 1919, actually over 100 years now. We're at 101. You know, just some quick facts on the Bank of North Dakota. It was started in 1919 originally to help farmers. It's had 13 plus years of record profits. It was the only bank to not go in the red during the 2008 financial crisis. It was actually able to pull a profit. And it has the highest number of credit unions and local community banks per capita in the entire country. And that is really a result of the Bank of North Dakota kind of acting as a banker's bank. So, you know, Bank of North Dakota, you can open up a checking and a savings account, but where they really expand capacity is with the local credit unions, and they tag onto existing loans. So they have a really good ecosystem and a strong financial local system there. So yeah, that's where we're at. Other cities around the whole country are trying to start public banks. LA is trying to do it. New York's trying to do it. Seattle. I even think Chicago. And you know, just a quick note that public banks really aren't, at least globally, they're nothing new. There's hundreds of public banks in Europe and in Asia, Australia, Canada. So this is really nothing new. It's kind of like a lot of issues in America, right, with free healthcare and free education. We are very exceptional, where other countries seem to be able to figure out those things and we can't. So, you know, public bank is definitely not a radical idea across the world, and even in our own country, right? North Dakota's had it. So, yeah.
Definitely. And you mentioned that you guys were just a coalition, so yeah. you're not a public bank yet.
Right.
What are the bureaucratic hurdles that you guys were going through in order to become an actual public bank?
Yeah, that's been the biggest, because, you know, this is uncharted territory. It's pretty unprecedented. A lot of coalitions in places around the country are kind of starting from scratch, right? The good news is there's a lot of support for public bank just in general. The idea, even among the supervisors, the so-called, you know, maybe moderate ones have actually been pretty on board as well. And I think some of the hurdles, you know, our first hurdle was that there didn't exist a current license that would allow for public banking. So without getting too technical, there's a statewide license that you need to get in order to open up a bank. And right now there's only two licenses that exist: commercial banking for, you know, if a private bank wants to do it, and a credit union. So there didn't exist a public banking license. So that was the first hurdle. The good news is we passed that at the state level, us along with coalition, organizing cities, partnering cities in LA and San Diego, Long Beach, Santa Rosa, East Bay. We formed the California Public Banking Alliance. I encourage you all to Google that, follow them on social media. And we basically rallied and mobilized together at the state capitol with Wall Street being there the entire way, every committee hearing, the bankers were there, and we fought them and navigated. A lot of big kudos to Trinity Tran with Public Bank LA. She really deserves a lot of props for leading that effort. But yeah, we succeeded. It went through the Assembly and the State Senate, and the governor signed it, and now there is a public bank license. So that was the first hurdle. After that was passed, the focus then shifted to the local level. So it was up to the local cities and counties and regions that wanted to start public banks to start creating a business plan. And basically the business plan would allow us to apply for that banking license. So, every city's kind of, because this is uncharted territory, every city's kind of figuring out what their first step is. And I think where we had left off pre-COVID-19 was creating a task force that would look into the creation of this business plan, figure out a way to capitalize the bank, where's the money going to come from, and create a robust business plan that then we could then apply for the license. Now that COVID-19 has happened, obviously there's a lot more immediate tasks that the city has to deal with, fully understand. We definitely don't want to lose momentum of public bank. We definitely see the need, and especially during COVID-19, how public banks could play a role. But we definitely kind of needed to regroup a little bit, because the conversation around, just legislative timeline and where the SOUP's capacity is at right now is kind of just, we're kind of in a lull right now, but we're actively regrouping and ready to move forward. So.
Okay, you briefly touched on the questions that I was about to ask you. So, we're going through this pandemic right now, and one of the things that we've been hearing about is that this pandemic has definitely it's showed us how much of a gross inequality we have. And I ask you, how will having a public bank right now help us address that inequality?
Yeah, and I first want to state that, public bank isn't a guarantee that it's going to be a socially just bank. The Bank of North Dakota funded $15 million against the water protectors. They funded militarized police against the water protectors at Standing Rock. So I think, before I start, it's up to the people and the public and to keep the bank accountable, and the bank's mission at the start, what it's prohibited from investing in, what it can invest in. So it's always a constant engagement. But I will say how a public bank, if it were envisioned, how the coalition were to envision it, how it could help during pandemic is, for example, right now, the stimulus package, right, that was trying to, they created this loan fund, or this loan for small businesses could apply for, the payroll protection plan, I think PPP it is. And what they do is, I'm still learning about it, so I don't want to, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the way is the feds give it to the banks, and the banks then are responsible for distributing that out to the local businesses. And there are problems in that, because Wall Street is not the most reliable institutions to allocate capital, especially to low-income people, to Black and brown communities, other communities of color. It has not had a good track record. And just recently, Bank of America was trending because they were only giving loans out they're only giving out the PPP program to customers that had loans out already. So if you were a small business customer with Bank of America for like 10 years, you got denied. So that's an example of a problem. And also the racial disparities, right? We're giving money to financial institutions that historically discriminate with redlining and where they set up their branches, so just by that nature, of course, there's going to be racial disparities when these loans go out. So if we had a public bank, we could basically cut out the middleman, and we could really tap into resources provided by the Federal Reserve and the federal government, because we had our own bank. We also have, it would also allow us to have more leverage with our tax dollars. The magic behind a public bank, especially a depository bank, is the ability to create money. So we don't, we can really leverage our tax dollars a lot more efficiently, as far as, you know, providing emergency funding, small business relief, you know, revolving loan funds for small homeowners and renters. So it's just a huge tool that can really help with a lot of disaster relief and providing capital basically to people who need it.
Yeah. All right. And as you mentioned, it does not guarantee social justice, but the reason why I say it is because the morals of San Francisco are very much attached to that of ensuring social justice. And as you mentioned, every city that will create their own public bank and that is in the process of creating a public bank will do so with its own interest and morals in line. Hence why this Bank of San Francisco makes us special, because we are pursuing social justice and economic equality. Thank you for that. So I just wanted to remind the folks that are watching, in about 5 minutes, we're gonna open up the Q&A for questions. So if you have a question that you would like to ask Kurtis and myself, please feel free to go to the Q&A portion. It should be down below, and submit your question, and we'll be touching on those in the next 5 minutes. But my last question, Kurtis, you briefly mentioned that pre-COVID-19, you guys had momentum. And I just wanted to ask how, you know, COVID-19 and this pandemic and the city shutting down, how will this alter your momentum, and how do you plan the coalition? I mean, how do you guys plan on making sure that you guys get back that momentum and that you guys are on track on accomplishing your goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will answer that in two parts. I think one is kind of just basic logistics, right? We all, as organizers, are finding kind of new ways to organize in this new kind of world we're living in, with physical distancing and not being able to gather. I mean, campaigns and, you know, organizers, you know, how we protest and how we, you know, pressure City Hall all looks a little different. So I think it's just taking a few moments to step back and re-strategize, like, how do we actually engage with the City Hall, and how do we engage with the public, and how do we organize in this new COVID world? I think the second part is messaging, right? Kind of seizing the opportunity about COVID-19 to talk about how a public bank could help, kind of things I mentioned earlier. I mean, that is the one silver lining, one of the silver linings about COVID-19. It's been able to expose a lot of these gross inequalities we've known for decades, and a lot of people have known, but it's just really it's magnifying it, as far as, like, you know, housing and homelessness and public health and healthcare and wealth inequality, right, and capitalism. So I think it's just been able to shine a light on that. So I think, you know, the way we are thinking about kind of keeping momentum is definitely keep the conversation going. We definitely still plan on pushing legislation through City Hall. Just have to strategically kind of pick the timing for that, since they have a lot of more immediate causes, which we understand. And I think it's just constantly pushing the narrative. You know, now that there are a lot of downtime, it's a great time to reach out to people. A lot of people are home or online. So doing things like this and just keeping the narrative up is kind of, I think, how we're going to continue the momentum, hopefully.
Definitely. Okay. And it seems like we are awaiting a few more questions. But before we get to that, my last question is, what if I want to get involved in this coalition? What if I want to contribute in any way that I can? How can I do that? Who do I go to?
Yeah. Well, you can go to our website, www.sfpublicbank.org. I believe there's a join our coalition section, so you can just click on that, and then someone will get back to you. We are all volunteer, grassroots, so be a little patient with us. You can also follow us on Twitter and DM us. Someone will get back to you. That might be a little better way. You can also reach out to me directly if you want. I can put my email and contact info in the chat later. But yeah, just reach us digitally. And so we have kind of coalition meetings. Obviously, they're virtual now. And yeah, we want more people involved, because we need, this bank is by the people, and we need the people to be represented by it. So I want to make sure anyone who wants to get involved can get involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure to send out the links for those of you that are interested in getting involved. I myself am interested in getting involved, so maybe you might see me there. So we have a question from Rick Dupree. Hi, Rick. I am reading your question now. He wants to thank us, Kurtis, for facilitating this event. Thank you, Rick, for watching.
Yeah.
And his question is about infrastructure. And they ask, how would a public bank work operationally? For example, post office banks in the UK, which have a somewhat similar mission to the Bank of North Dakota, still have to partner with big banks like Bank of Ireland and Capital One to move money, issue cards, etc. Without getting too technical, how do you foresee building the infrastructure? That's a great question. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's an ongoing conversation. We're kind of all learning, but the way we kind of see it, envisioning, is the public bank is more like a banker's bank. So it really partners really closely with local credit unions and mission-driven banks, and helps them expand their programming and loans by tagging on to those existing loans. So what you're going to see is, what we envision is really an expansion of capital within the local banking sector. A lot of these local banks and credit unions get eaten up by the bigger banks. So
Yeah.
I love that song, Big Bank, whatever, Big Bank, Take Little Bank. I think that's a perfect song for our coalition. If not, it's like our anthem. So yeah, part one is to strengthen the local credit unions and community banks.
Okay.
As far as postal banking is actually really interesting, especially what's going on with the post office right now. It's really scary. They're getting defunded, and hopefully they stay around, obviously. But postal banking, this idea that it's a federal program that would use the post office, that could, you could have credit cards and services like checking accounts and savings account, really for individuals who can't access that. And the way the public bank can, is definitely supportive, or very supportive of postal banking. But we see really public banking strengthening the local community banks, and really more for big infrastructure projects, like funding things like the construction of affordable housing, or financing construction for City College, like if we want to build a new campus, financing big infrastructure projects like our C-bond. And what the issue is when we use private banks is, we're charged a lot on the interest or the bonds. So if we have our own self-determination, where we can say, hey, we're going to give you a really good rate, or maybe not even an interest rate at all. And on top of that, if we do charge a low interest rate, the bank then gets the money, right? So it's a great cyclical way of kind of keeping the money within the local economy. There's this whole effort on eating locally, and how you keep the food, eat within 100 miles, right? We should have that same mentality with money, right? Keeping the money within the same kind of radius will be better. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah. Will the money eventually leave the local region, or is the purpose specifically to guarantee that it stays locally?
I mean, that's kind of an open question. It could go both ways. I mean, in theory, a public bank could lend outside of its jurisdiction, or outside of its, the city. It theoretically could do that. I think the idea is to keep it locally, but there may be something where we want to help our local neighbors, and let's say there's like wildfires in the front, and our public bank wants to help our North Bay neighbors in some relief, financial relief. I could see that happening as well. It's kind of up to like the situation at the time, and kind of what the parameters are around funding.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And now we're moving on to a second question by Susanna. Hi, Susanna. Thank you for watching. And their question is, how is a public bank different from a credit union?
Yeah, great question. So a credit union, as you know, you're not really like, credit union, it's made up by the members of the bank. So if you are a depositor, you are technically part owner. With the public bank, it's owned by one entity, the government, the city and county of San Francisco. It's also kind of acts like a separate entity of the city. So a great comparison is kind of like how the airport is. The San Francisco airport is government owned and operated, but it's a separate entity. It has its own budget, it has its own board of directors, and it has its own thing. So that's kind of how we envision. Again, we don't envision our bank as a bank where you could necessarily like, hey, I want to open up a checking account with the SF Public Bank. That's where we see the credit unions coming in. So yeah.
Okay, and we have another question from Humphrey. I believe we touched a little bit about this earlier in the conversation when I asked you about the bureaucratic hurdles that the coalition was currently going through. But in regards to Humphrey's questions, they ask what kind of legislation is being pushed right now to guarantee that you guys, that the coalition becomes a public bank. You discussed a little bit about the momentum, but how are you making sure that we are advocating to our supervisors and the board of supervisors to guarantee that this coalition becomes an institution in the city of San Francisco?
Yeah, no, great question. I appreciate that. So some of the legislation we're working on right now, Supervisor Sandra Lee Fewer, Supervisor District 1, introduced legislation that would basically look into creating another task force. And that task force would be charged with creating a business plan for a public bank. It would also be kind of discussing how we could capitalize the bank. So basically where we get money to start the bank. These are all kind of options we have on the table. Again, like I said before, COVID-19 has kind of made us revisit, but it doesn't change the fact that these are all kind of options we have to explore. So I'll name a few more options to explore are, things that we need to get the bank started are a governance structure. I think that's incredibly important as far as how the bank board of directors is composed. Who is represented at that board of directors as far as, you're definitely going to need some banking experts, but you're going to need community reps as well. How does the governance structure look with, in terms of supervisor and mayor appointments and, things like that. So and I think that is really one of the most critical pieces, because that's going to really determine, like we talked about before, about the mission of the bank and things like that, is really going to be dictated by the board of directors. Also are the bank's charter. So basically like the mission and principles. So what is the bank, what is it prohibited from funding it? Our coalition has made it clear in our mission and principles page on our website, we don't want a dime in fossil fuel industry. We don't want a dime in detention centers. We don't want a dime in weapons. We don't want our bank being complicit in funding these things. And also talks about what we do want it to fund. So these are all things that we're working on pushing legislatively post AB 857, the state bill. But right now, I think it is really the task force that's looking into creating the business plan, because that's step
one. All right, so we have another question from Alvin, and it is a little bit where we're diving deeper into the question that I asked you previously.
Sure.
And Alvin, what are some of the reasons and how do we convince them? If you're able to talk about that, but if you definitely want to sugarcoat it or jump ahead, feel free to do so.
No, that's great. So every resolution we've passed, anything that's happened at City Hall, it's actually gotten, I believe, unanimous support I think one resolution where it was urging the state to create that license, it actually got unanimous co-sponsorship by the Board of Supervisors. So actually everyone's very lukewarm to it. But there are definitely some soups who have some concerns or more concerns over others. And some of those concerns are, kind of money, right? Where's the money going to come from? A lot of soups are very, may not want to touch something like that maybe the optics for them is like, oh, I'm going to bankrupt the city, even though we don't think that's going to happen. But that I think is a fear with the city is, if the soups are going to be kind of their legacy, maybe is like, I'm going to bankrupt the city. I think that might be a fear for them, even though we think that's really not true. A public bank would actually be more fiscally responsible. But yeah, I would say definitely call your supervisors. I mean, now's a great time that we're all at home, and supervisors actually they have now allowed for public comment via phone, which is great. And I think they should do it all the time. It's a great time just to call in and say, why we need a public bank now. So those are ways you can always write your supervisor, tweet your supervisor, tell them. But I will say the ones that have been very more vocal for it are obviously Supervisor Fewer, Supervisor Hillary Ronan, Matt Haney, Shimon Walton, Dean Preston. They have been really more on the vocal side.
All right. So y'all heard that. Make sure that you call your supervisors and make sure that you ask for their support. I definitely believe this public bank is a great idea and very reflective of what San Francisco is and what we're trying to accomplish as a progressive city that we are, which leads me to my final question of the conversation. Wait, it looks like we have another question. Let me see.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so a question from Alejo. They ask, as this bank is predicated on offering below market rate interest on loans, surely demand for these loans will outpace the bank's ability to lend. How would the bank allocate its scarce resources? Why not charge market rate generate the best return for SF taxpayers? Hopefully I didn't botch that. But,
no, that was great.
Thank you,
yeah,
Alejo.
no, that's a great. Yeah, thanks, Leah. That's a great question. I think, well, first is the mission of the bank, right? The mission of this public bank isn't to necessarily maximize the most amount of profit possible. That's the role of a private bank. At the same time, a public bank needs to make money. It is a bank. So the way that we envision this public banking making money is kind of like how North Dakota does it. The public bank in North Dakota, first off, because they are their own bank and they don't have to charge themselves their own fees. So for example, we get charged, I think, close to around $1 million or so, maybe 100, I forgot the exact amount, but we get charged in fees by Wall Street simply by doing business with them. So with the cost savings, we would save so much money by not having to charge ourselves to bank with ourselves. So that's cost savings right there. Also, any loans and stuff that we go out come back to our bank, so it's cyclical in how we keep the money within their economy. And third, is CEO pay. I mean, these Wall Street CEOs make an obscene amount of money. I don't even know how much. I can't even fathom. But I know the Bank of North Dakota, I think the last time I checked, he makes $300,000 a year, which is a lot. But it's much more in line. But it's still a lot. Yes, I mean, to everyday people, that's a lot. But comparatively to hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars, like these Wall Street CEOs, it's much more aligned with a government kind of role. So I think the cost savings are going to be much better. And again, I think the end of the day, though, this bank's goal is to really help the public and still generate a public profit, but not to maximize profit.
Definitely. All right. That was a lot of information, but very digestible. And that pretty much concludes our conversation. I was going to ask one last question, but you pretty much touched on it about the future of banks and what it will mean for our future and the future of this country, in the city as well. But nonetheless, thank you so much, Kurtis, for joining us for this wonderful conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope our viewers learned as well. I definitely think this is a very important topic to be discussing, especially with what is happening right now. And to be honest, this made me aware that I should also be calling my supervisor and making sure that we advocate for this public bank. I definitely think it will become an arm that the city of San Francisco will very much need and will very much make good use of. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your knowledge, very incredible knowledge. And I look forward to all the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too. Thank you so much, Jupiter. Thanks for hosting us and really I love the civic conversations too. I'm a big fan of that.
Awesome.
So, yeah, thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much. And I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, soon, very soon, hopefully.
Okay. Bye.